From the very early stages, you would introduce the 5 questions of who, where, what, why and when. And you get the children to understand this. Now, there is a song on the CD which is who, where, what, why, don't forget when. Hopefully the children will take this on board and they will find themselves like remembering almost by osmosis, because they've sung the song since they were in nursery. But it is difficult if you're looking at a single sheet of white paper and somebody's expecting you to write. Well, one of the things that you've got to show children are that there are 5 questions. 5 questions that people ask about a story. And those questions all start with a W and an H. And even when the children are very small, there is no reason why you won't expect them to write this up. But there's no reason why they can't be introduced to the idea of showing 5 fingers of who, where, what, why and when. It does come in handy when the children are older. And what you're going to do is, you're going to show them that there are 5 questions that people ask. Well, who are the characters? What is the plot? And if you say that to children so that they have a kind of a rhyme, which is, what is the plot? What is happening inside of the story? And I'm sure we've all come across those stories where there's lots of description, but nothing actually happens. So, who are the characters? What is the plot? When is part of the setting, so that you have who, what, when, where, again, part of the setting. And the last one, which is often quite difficult, and it's very interesting to ask children after you've told them a simple story, with the very young ones, if you've told them a story of, say, Goldilocks, and you ask them, why did Goldilocks go wandering off? And they'll come up with some quite surprising answers. So you've got the 5 questions. Who, where, what, why and when, but not necessarily in that order. And you introduce children to those 5 questions, and then, when they're older, when they're getting towards the end of Key Stage 1, you tell them that their job as an author is to tell people how. And this is the writing part. Again, if I can just emphasise that this is for you to understand the content of a story. We all go to college and we're told to write stories, but if you know and understand the formula behind a story, then you've got a good basis that you can help the children to understand what it is that is needed inside of a story. When you're answering the questions for people who are wanting to read a decently constructed story. Well, the job is, as an author, and tell the children when they're really young that they are authors, so that they get used to the name of author. They are writing for a purpose, they're writing for somebody else to read. And if you say to them, the most important person who's ever going to read your work is you. 5 questions. And now we start to give the answers. Well, one of the answers is how it can be described using adjectives. Well, in the booklet we talk about getting the children to close their eyes, because if I was to tell them a story and say there was a fish, then it's not a very good story. But if they close their eyes, and you try it now, close your eyes, because there is a fish. It's as wide as my hand and as long as my arm, with 2 beautiful round golden eyes and blood red fins at its neck. It swims through the water as fast as a bird can fly in the clear blue air, but when it comes to the top of the calm, calm sea, then its voice sounds like honey in the air. And then you get the children to open their eyes, and they should get used to the idea that through description you are painting a picture with words. That is all we are trying to do, paint a picture with words. But again, this is for you. So how is the description using adjectives? How someone feels using emotions. And I've always found that a good way, when you're telling a story to even the youngest of children, to talk about the heart as a means of description for emotion, rather than sad, happy. And even from year 5s and 6s, I've had very sad and very happy. Talk about how the heart feels. His heart felt like a stone inside of his chest. There wasn't a single part of her heart that hadn't been broken into 1,000,000 pieces of glass. you must emphasise that it's not just sad and happy. Description, feelings, senses, the 5 senses. What do we get? Ours is a very visual society, and it's all about how wide, how long, what colour it is. We'll get the children to use 5 senses, and one of the ways to get children used to this is by telling a story where someone eats something, so they can talk about how it tastes. Get somebody to walk past a butcher's shop and talk about the disgusting smell, or past a drain or past a river and talk about the smell, or maybe just about the sounds, or get someone to lose a shoe so they can talk about how the ground feels on their feet. In all of this, it's necessary for you to model it so that description is used all of the time, feelings are used using the heart, senses are used. Well, there's one thing that we get children to put into their stories right from a very age, and that's talk. Well, you will need to have talk. Even in the reception, the children would write, "I see my dad," "I say hello," and things like this. And when you're getting towards the end of Key Stage 1, you're starting to get the children to try and work away from said and said and said and said. And one of the things that you can emphasise, and this is something that I do not introduce until we get towards the latter end of Key Stage 2, where you start to talk about, to get the children to write this, because you'll have been doing it within your storytelling, but to get the children to write it, you talk about how the voice sounds. And the way that you can get this across is by saying to the children, "Help," he shouted. Well, there's nothing wrong with that, that's fine. But help, his voice was filled with fear and anger. And you've talked about feelings, and you haven't mentioned how the words were actually spoken. Help, his voice was rattling and echoing in that empty place. And with that, you've used the setting. But if you put the two of them together, it comes out, help, his voice was filled with fear and anger and rattled and echoed in that empty place. And now you've got a much more mature way of actually describing the way that it was talked. Now, I'll give you an idea of how you can show children how this works. This is not what you would show to the children in reception. What you would have is a board with these 5 questions on. And when the children come up to you and go, "I don't know what to write," well, you can put 5 fingers in front of them and say, who is going to do something in this story? What are they going to do? When are they going to do it? Where and why? And it saves that long queue of 17 children all saying that they're stuck with a story when you go like that. It puts the emphasis on them to actually construct the story. And they know that there's a structure now. So, if I tell the story and say, "I fell off a wall," it's not enough. But if I say, "When I was younger, my friends were always daring me to walk on a wall, and I never would, but one day, when the sun was shining high in the sky and looked like a great golden coin, we were walking by the side of the old park that was filled with trees that are strong and tall and look like soldiers. Well, there was a wall, but it was no higher than my hip. And with their teeth together, they hissed at me, 'Go on, get up on the wall.' But it was only as high as my hip. And up I got on top of the old brown crumbling bricks. And as I walked along the wall, I started to show off. I started to dance this way and that. And it was when I was dancing on top of the wall that my foot slipped. Well, the wall might have been as high as my hip on one side, but it was taller than me on the other. And I found myself falling down towards the thin roof of the insect house of the zoo. And then I fell through that roof and found myself surrounded by 1,000 man-eating spiders. And you've got a choice. I fell off a wall, or the second one,